I want to tell you a story. It was a Wednesday. I remember because Wednesdays were my holding it together days. I was in line at a coffee shop, a small independent place I loved. The barista, new and clearly overwhelmed, had just messed up my order for the second time. My day had already started with a tense email, a missed deadline, and a difficult conversation I didn't want to have. I was tired, I was wired, and suddenly, without thinking, I snapped at her. It was a quiet snap, a passive-aggressive sigh, just enough eye roll to say, "Seriously?" She looked at me, embarrassed, cheeks red, and I saw it, that flicker of pain in her eyes. A moment later, she turned to remake my drink, and I stood there, hollowed out by shame. Not because I was angry, but because I'd forgotten she was human. I'd made her my target instead of my mirror. That day changed me, because I realized anger isn't about them. It's almost always about us, what we haven't healed, what we're still carrying, what we expect the world to fix for us. Before we begin, take a breath with me. If this message resonates, please like, comment, subscribe, and share. We grow this space together, one brave heart at a time. I used to think that if I was angry, it meant I was failing at being kind, that somehow feeling anger made me less spiritual, less mature, less good. I carried that belief like a heavy backpack, constantly trying to unzip and repack my emotions into something more acceptable, more pleasing, more appropriate. But here's the truth I finally came to understand. Anger is not a flaw in our humanity. It's a feature of it. It's not a moral failing. It's a signal, one of the clearest, loudest, most persistent signals we have. And ignoring it doesn't make us more evolved. It just makes us disconnected. Imagine for a second you're driving your car, and the check engine light comes on. You wouldn't throw a blanket over the dashboard and say, well, if I don't see it, it's not there. You wouldn't shame the car for being broken. You'd get curious. You'd take it in, get under the hood, and try to figure out what's really going on. That's what anger is. It's your inner dashboard lighting up, saying something here feels unsafe, dishonored, dismissed, or threatened. It's your nervous system telling you that something inside is knocking on the door, asking to be seen. Anger is often our first line of emotional defense. It's how our brain protects our more vulnerable feelings from being exposed too soon. And beneath anger, if we're brave enough to pause and look, there's usually grief. There's fear, there's betrayal, there's disappointment. There's an ache that didn't know how else to be heard. So when we rush to bury our anger, or worse, shame ourselves for having it, we're not being wise, we're being afraid. We're afraid of what we'll find beneath it. Afraid of being called too much or too emotional or not in control. But the irony is we don't become more in control by denying our anger. We become more reactive, more unpredictable, more volatile, even if it's quiet and internal. I remember a moment in my early 20s. I was in a relationship where I constantly felt dismissed, not in loud, dramatic ways, but in small, eroding moments. He'd interrupt me mid-sentence, make decisions without including me, dismiss my ideas with a laugh. I never said anything. I told myself, it's not a big deal, don't make waves, be cool. But inside I was seething, not because of one moment, but because of many ignored moments. That anger built a dam inside me, one I didn't even know existed, until one day I found myself screaming in the parking lot over a late text message. The explosion didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of everywhere I had silenced myself. That's the risk when we don't listen to our anger. It doesn't disappear, it builds up, and eventually it either leaks out sideways through sarcasm, passive aggression, withdrawal, or it blows up and leaves emotional shrapnel everywhere. So how do we honor anger without letting it consume us? We learn to sit with it, name it, get curious instead of reactive. Instead of thinking, I shouldn't be angry, we ask, what is this anger trying to tell me? What boundary was crossed? What need went unmet? What part of me feels unseen, unheard, or unsafe? And then, and this is key, we respond to ourselves with compassion, not condemnation. Because the goal isn't to get rid of anger. The goal is to understand it, to let it guide us to deeper truths, to use it as a flashlight, not a flamethrower. When we do that, anger stops being a force that controls us, and instead, it becomes a powerful ally. One that teaches us what matters, what hurts, and what we're ready to heal. You're not wrong for feeling angry. You're not weak. You're not broken. You're human. And the more lovingly you meet your anger, the less it will need to scream to be heard. We've all held someone accountable to a promise they never actually made. Not out loud, at least. We assume, we hope, we imagine that if we show up a certain way, with kindness, with loyalty, with thoughtfulness, others will mirror that back. And when they don't, we feel betrayed, disappointed, sometimes even furious. But here's the painful truth that most of us aren't taught. Expectations are often silent contracts no one else signed. We carry around these internal rule books, and they're filled with chapters like, if I'm always there for you, you'll be there for me. If I never raise my voice, you'll never hurt me. If I remember every detail of your life, you'll never forget what matters to me. The problem, we rarely hand these rule books to the people in our lives. We just assume they've read them, and we get heartbroken when they don't follow the rules we never told them about. It's like inviting someone into a game, but only you know the rules, and then getting upset when they keep losing. But what if they weren't trying to fail you? What if they just didn't know the playbook you were operating from? I remember a time when I was absolutely furious with a friend. I had gone out of my way to support her during a difficult season of her life, dropping things to be there, texting check-ins, sending care packages. So when my hard season came and she wasn't showing up in the same way, I felt abandoned. I carried that resentment quietly until one day I snapped. I accused her of being selfish, of not caring, of only showing up when it was convenient. She was shocked. And then she said something I'll never forget. I didn't know you needed that. I didn't know you were hurting. You never told me. It was a gut punch. Not because she was wrong, but because she was right. I had expected her to just know. I had assumed my quiet sacrifice would come back to me in the same shape and form, but I'd never spoken my need out loud, and I had turned my pain into blame. That's what unspoken expectations do. They create space for misunderstandings, they build a foundation of resentment, and they silently erode our relationships, not because people are unkind, but because we made them responsible for meeting needs we never voiced. And this doesn't just happen with people, it happens with life too. We expect things to be fair, we expect our careers to reward our hard work, we expect love to feel easy when it's right, we expect that if we do everything right, we'll be protected from loss. But life doesn't operate on our imagined contracts. It doesn't consult our expectations before it throws us a curveball. And when we cling too tightly to how we think it should be, we end up missing the opportunity to work with what is. Here's the shift, the invitation. Turn your expectations into conversations. Turn your assumptions into questions. Turn your silence into clarity. Instead of expecting your partner to know you're overwhelmed, say it. Instead of assuming your friend will celebrate you the way you celebrated them, share what would feel meaningful. Instead of getting angry at someone for not meeting a need, ask yourself if you ever gave them the chance to. This isn't weakness, it's maturity. It's choosing clarity over resentment. It's choosing connection over assumption. It's choosing to be known fully even when it feels vulnerable. So if you find yourself getting upset with someone lately, pause and ask yourself, did I ever give them the rule book I'm holding them to? Did I tell them what I needed? Did I let them see the part of me that was hoping to be met? You don't have to throw away your needs, but if you want real peace, real connection, and real emotional freedom, Stop expecting people to read your mind. Let them in, let them know, let them choose to love you on purpose. Because love that's chosen, not assumed, is the only kind that truly lasts. We often think of boundaries as barricades, harsh lines drawn in the sand to keep people out. We imagine them as ultimatums, as final warnings, as walls we put up to protect ourselves from being hurt again. And for a long time, I thought that too. That if I said no, I was being selfish. That if I needed space, I was being cold. That if I honored my limits, I was somehow letting people down. But that belief left me exhausted, smiling on the outside, simmering with quiet resentment on the inside. Until one day, I hit a breaking point. It wasn't a dramatic moment, no big blowout, no final straw. It was something simpler. I was at dinner with someone I loved, and they asked me to do something small. Something I'd normally say yes to without thinking, but something in me whispered, "You're tired. Say no." And for the first time I did. I said, "I can't tonight. I need to take care of myself." I was terrified of how they'd respond. But you know what happened? They said, "Of course. Thank you for being honest." It was such a small moment, but it cracked something open in me because I realized that boundaries aren't rejections. They're revelations. They tell the truth. They say, "This is what I need to be okay." They say, "Here's where I end and you begin." They say, "I can love you and still choose me." Boundaries aren't walls that push people away. They're bridges that teach people how to meet you safely, respectfully, and honestly. They allow real connection, not the kind where you constantly betray yourself to keep the peace, but the kind where your yes actually means something because you've given yourself permission to say no. Without boundaries, relationships become performance. We pretend, we people please, we shape-shift to be what others need until we lose ourselves completely. We say yes when we mean no. We give when we're already empty. We stay silent when something hurts us, and then wonder why we feel so alone. But here's the deeper truth. Every time you say yes to something that violates your peace, you say no to yourself. Every time you suppress your discomfort to protect someone else's comfort, you abandon your own heart. Boundaries are not a punishment to others. They are a profound act of self-respect. They say, "I am worthy of care, even my own." And they aren't just about saying no. They're also about saying yes with clarity. Yes, I'd love to help. And here's when I'm available. Yes, I'm open to this conversation, but not when it becomes disrespectful. Yes, I value this relationship, and I need time to recharge so I can show up fully. Boundaries create a rhythm, a balance. They make space for sustainable love, not love that burns out from overgiving. They build trust, because when you're honest about your limits, people know they can trust your words. They deepen intimacy, because nothing is more intimate than being seen clearly and still accepted. I know it's not easy, especially if you've been taught that your worth is tied to your usefulness, if your identity has been shaped by how well you care for others, how often you show up, how quietly you suffer. But please hear this. You are not selfish for having needs. You are not cold for needing space. You are not unkind for protecting your peace. You are allowed to take up space in your own life. You are allowed to be a whole person, not just a support beam for everyone else. And yes, setting boundaries may disappoint some people, especially those who've benefited from your lack of them. But the right people, the people who love you in truth, not just convenience, they'll rise to meet your honesty. They'll learn how to love you in a way that honors both of you. So take the risk, say the thing, draw the line, build the bridge. Because boundaries, when made with love, don't shut people out, they invite them in. More clearly, more honestly, more humanly. And in that kind of relationship, the one that sees you, respects you, and walks across the bridge with you, there's no room left for quiet resentment, only space and peace and presence. And that's the kind of life worth protecting. The sharp comment, the cold silence, the betrayal, the sarcasm, the distance that suddenly grows between you and someone you thought you knew. It cuts deep, not just because it hurts, but because it feels like proof. Proof that we're not enough, proof that we're unlovable, proof that we've failed in some invisible, unforgivable way. But here's something I wish we were all taught earlier. Most people aren't acting out of cruelty. They're acting out of pain, not because they're bad, but because they're bleeding somewhere inside and they don't know how to stop it. When people lash out, shut down, ghost, withdraw, overreact, criticize, it's not necessarily a reflection of your worth. It's a mirror of their own unhealed wounds. That doesn't make the behavior right. It doesn't mean you should tolerate disrespect or stay in harmful situations, but it does mean this. What someone says or does to you is rarely about you. It's about the battlefield they're fighting on the inside. I remember a moment when someone close to me erupted over something incredibly small. A forgotten message, a missed call, their voice cracked, and their frustration came out hot and fast. My first instinct was to defend myself, to snap back, to match their energy, but something in me paused, just enough to hear what was underneath the surface, and then they said, in a barely there whisper, "I just always feel like people leave me." That was the root. Not the message, not the call, not me. It was an old aching wound speaking through a new moment. We all have them. Bruises from the past that haven't fully healed. And unless we're conscious of them, they become the lens through which we interpret everything. Rejection, abandonment, not being good enough, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being forgotten, fear of never being safe in someone else's care. So we act from those places, and when someone else does too, their pain meets our pain, and the cycle continues. Reaction meets reaction, hurt meets hurt. Two people protecting themselves from ghosts the other person can't even see. But here's what's powerful. When we learn to pause, when we create just enough space to ask ourselves, what's this really about? For them and for me? We begin to respond instead of react. We soften, not into passivity, but into understanding. We learn that empathy is not agreement, it's insight. It's the courage to hold on to our compassion even in the face of someone else's chaos. Because when someone is drowning in their pain, they don't need another wave. They need an anchor. And sometimes you get to be that anchor, not by fixing them, but by refusing to absorb their storm as your identity. You get to say, I see your pain, but I don't have to become it. I hear your story, but I'm not the villain in it. I will not match your fear with more fear. That's not weakness, that's strength. Emotional maturity is the ability to say, I know who I am, even when someone else forgets who they are in front of me. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is not take it personally. To remember that the sharp edge wasn't shaped by you. It was forged long before you arrived. To remember that you didn't cause the wound, you just brushed up against it. And to remind yourself, gently but clearly, this is not mine to carry. This doesn't mean you accept mistreatment. It means you stop confusing someone else's survival strategy for your truth. It means you learn to recognize when someone's fear is louder than their love, and you decide not to let that fear define how you see yourself. You are not the worst thing someone has projected onto you. You are not the target of someone's unhealed trauma. You are not responsible for fixing what they refuse to face, but you are responsible for how you choose to respond. And the most powerful choice you can make is to see with softer eyes. Eyes that know. People are rarely just being difficult. They're often just in difficulty. People aren't heartless. They're hardened by heartbreak. People don't always mean harm. They just haven't found a safe way to ask for help. And in that space, that breath between hurt and reaction, you regain your power. The power to stand in your peace, to protect your dignity, to walk away if needed, but not in bitterness, in clarity. So the next time someone comes at you from a place of pain, ask yourself, is this really about me, Or am I standing in the shadow of something that came long before me? Really, really believe that you can't come out someone from the pain of loss or of the shadow of something that came long before me. And then remind yourself, you don't have to take it personally to take it seriously. You can honor someone's humanity without holding their hurt as your own. Because compassion, when paired with boundaries, is not weakness. It's one of the strongest forms of love there is. To detach, to become unbothered. To reach that cool, untouchable version of ourselves who doesn't flinch, doesn't feel, doesn't get angry, who just lets everything roll off our back like water. And I get it. When you've been hurt, when you've been disrespected, when someone's actions have chipped away at your dignity or blindsided your heart, the idea of becoming numb sounds like relief, like peace, like protection. But let me tell you something I had to learn the hard way. The opposite of anger is not apathy. It's accountability. Because apathy doesn't heal you. It just builds another wall between you and your own truth. It's emotional frostbite. You go cold so you don't feel the sting. But what you don't feel, you don't process. And what you don't process, you carry. Anger, on the other hand, is not the enemy. It's the flare in the dark saying, something here isn't right. It's your nervous system waving a flag, asking, will you protect me this time? But where anger can become destructive is when it stays bottled, when it gets shoved down, or worse, when it explodes sideways, hitting everyone but the actual source. That's why we have to redirect our anger, not repress it, not unleash it, but translate it. And the translation is this: what is this anger asking me to take responsibility for? What truth have I been avoiding? What boundaries have I been betraying? My own or someone else's? Because the real antidote to anger isn't pretending you don't care. It's stepping into your power and saying, I care deeply, and here's what needs to change. That's accountability. That's when anger becomes movement. That's when pain becomes choice. I remember a time in my life when I kept saying yes to things that made me feel small. I didn't want to rock the boat, didn't want to disappoint anyone. I wanted to be liked. But behind the smile, I was simmering, tired, bitter, resentful. Until one day I snapped at someone who didn't even deserve it. It wasn't about them, it was about me, and how I had been abandoning myself over and over again. That moment woke me up. Not because I got caught, but because I saw my own reflection in that anger, and I didn't like what I saw. So I sat down and got honest. Where had I been dishonest with myself? Where had I let things slide because I was afraid of being misunderstood? Where had I expected people to change instead of changing how I showed up? It wasn't easy. Accountability never is. But here's the gift. When you start owning your anger instead of outsourcing it, you reclaim your power. You stop being the victim of every conversation, every relationship, every text left on read. You start showing up like someone who knows they matter, without needing to yell about it. Because when you hold people accountable with calm clarity, not fury, not sarcasm, not silence, something shifts. You speak from your center, not your chaos. You become someone others respect, not just tolerate. And most importantly, you begin to respect yourself. Let me be clear. Accountability doesn't mean blaming yourself for everything. It means recognizing the space between your pain and your reaction and choosing to lead from your integrity, not your injury. It means saying, I felt hurt, and here's what I need instead. That crossed a line, and I won't allow it again. I've been quiet for too long, and that silence cost me. It means choosing responsibility over resentment, action over avoidance, truth over pretending to be okay. This is where real peace is born, not from shutting down, but from stepping up. Not from denying your emotions, but from using them as signals, not settlements. Not from bottling things inside until they boil over, but from practicing emotional maturity with fierce compassion. So the next time you feel that spark of anger rise up, don't try to extinguish it. Ask it what it knows. Ask it what it's trying to protect. And then ask yourself, what will I do with this information? Will I stuff it down and call it chill? Will I explode and call it real? Or will I pause, breathe, and take ownership of what's mine and only mine to carry? That's the sacred power of accountability. It doesn't ask you to be unbothered. It asks you to be brave, to say the hard thing with love, to make the boundary, not the blame, the point, to stand up for yourself without standing in your own way. Because healing doesn't come from being unaffected. It comes from being deeply affected and still choosing integrity over impulse, grace over rage, truth over fear. That's not apathy, that's transformation. So if you're listening to this and you've been angry lately, I want you to know you're not broken. You're human. But you don't have to live at the mercy of your reactions. You can choose to pause. You can choose to ask, what's really going on here? You can choose to soften, not shrink, to protect your peace without losing your power. Start small. One breath before the outburst. One boundary where you used to bend. One story you rewrite with compassion instead of judgment. Because the world needs more people who know how to stay kind in chaos, who can meet conflict with clarity, who lead not with control, but with calm. That person is already in you. You're not here to fight your way through life. You're here to feel it, learn from it, and walk forward. Light, clear, and free.